It's a pleasure to be here, and let's reflect that there's only one known British figure who will speak words of truth about 7/7, I think, and that's David. David Icke has enabled this issue to be on the agenda and brought people's minds to a focus, the idea of fake terror, of fabricated terror, the idea that people who got in charge of our governments, that somehow something has gone unbelievably, horribly wrong, and these are people who can actually construct terror because they want wars, because and so forth. We're now, yet another Islamic war has started without our permission or consent. We, the taxpayers, don't want it and didn't ask for it. And we're going to look today at how this fabricated terror is used to get people into accepting war through the idea of an enemy. And David has always tried to tell people that the government wants you to live in fear. It wants to create fear images. And I think that's so important. And he's tried to give out a message that actually we don't need to live in fear. We can try to fulfill our lives in the way that we want to without being given these fear images from the government. And I'm going to suggest that this country has possibly not got any Islamic terrorism, or else very, very minimal Islamic terrorism. And the major European terror events, the major spectaculars, are government fabricated. This is very much an argument one associates with Webster Tarpley, 9/11 synthetic terror, and he was in Italy with when that whole Bologna train stories were developing in the 1980s of elements, renegade elements of NATO causing bombing terror events that were then used to demonise the communists. Okay, so he's got quite a track record, and he's written a classic book about 9/11, state-sponsored terror, but also how the European terror events like the Madrid train bombings and the London 7/7 bombings in 2005 were done by the state. And by saying done by the state, I'm not necessarily saying the British state. It's not necessarily MI5 did it. They're complicit, but we never know to what extent it's British, American, CIA, FBI, and Mossad is Israel. These are so closely linked together, we can never properly separate them. And let's just recall that at the end of the last century, David published a book in which he prophesied that Muslims were going to be demonised. Do you remember that, in The Biggest Secret? He prophesied they were going to become the new enemy. And I can remember sort of not believing that, surely this can't be. We lived through a whole decade of the 90s when we hadn't got an enemy, remember? The commies had ceased in 1991, when the Soviet Empire broke up, and for a whole decade, the British and American military were in a kind of crisis because they hadn't got an enemy. And this is a country, both Britain and America, cannot be governed for long without an enemy. That is deeply within the structure of how this country is governed and the tremendous dominance that the military have over our lives, that they want to give us an enemy. And I think it's our business and our struggle. We want to see a civilised country that we want to live in, saying actually we don't need these enemy images. We don't want our army out in other countries, and we can live without this. Especially, we want to find out the guilty people responsible for creating these events and put them on trial. Okay? Now, we've got an unsolved murder mystery. 52 people died on July 7th, 2005. I got drawn into it just because it's where my college, I was at UCL, just up the road from Tavistock Square, and I always lived in London. I was involved in the 9/11 Truth movement. I also got involved in something called the 7/7 Truth Campaign, and I was just fascinated by it all. And suddenly, the big event for me was we went up to Luton Station, because the suggestion was being made that the train times didn't quite fit, and we went up to Luton, and I managed to get all the official train timetable for that day. Likewise from King's Cross, we interviewed commuters, and we finally broke the story. This train that the terrorists were supposed to be on that morning, 7:40 from Luton down to King's Cross, had been cancelled. And so this is totally unexpected, totally out of the blue. They planned the perfect crime, they thought it got it all down to a T, and somehow this act of fate they were still really under the impact. You look here, the official account written a year later. This has them on the 7:40 train, right? It's May 2006. The government's official account. What happened on July 7th? They're on the 7:40 train at Luton, coming down to King's Cross. So a month after that, the Home Secretary had to apologise to House of Commons, saying, "Look, we're sorry about this, but it wasn't a 7:40 that morning. We've been getting it wrong for a whole year, and they must have got some other train." So the question is, but we also discovered that all the trains were running late that morning. They were really late due to overhead cable power trouble, something totally unexpected. So the whole government story became jammed up because they'd put out CCTVs at Luton and other ones at King's Cross. Oh, here are the terrorists, and the times they'd given just wouldn't square with these very slow trains available, and there wasn't really any train they could have got that would have. That would have done it. So let me try to go through what really happened on that day, because more and more intelligent people are coming to realise that the story, the ripple effect put out by Muad'Dib, which this poor chap's been in jail for quite a while for making that video, just been released, that is something quite near the truth, okay? And that ripple effect has the four young lads inveigled into the event thinking they were helping the government on some sort of terror drill. So they really did come up that morning. Okay, before going into it, let's backtrack a bit. I think the British story, what happened on July the 7th, has to start in May of the previous year with the Panorama programme. Now the Panorama programme, it gives you the story, and it says this is a docudrama. It's something slightly fictional but mainly true, and it's set in the future, but only just. That's what they said on the programme, set in the future, but only just. Webster Tarpley, I'll just quote his comment on the programme. No terrorist attack will be complete without the advanced airing of a scenario docudrama to provide the population with a conceptual scheme to help them understand the coming events in the sense intended by the oligarchy. Now, the main spokesperson of that Panorama programme was Peter Power. He's an important character. He's the terror czar, Britain's terror czar, and he helps companies to organise terror drills and build in what was called resilience into your company, how to survive the terror attack. It's not if, but when. To get ready for the terror. And the grim story, which I suggest we have to face up to, is that the anti-terror chiefs are the people who make it happen. They go through, they imagine, they drill the events, and maybe most of the people in the drills are of good conscience. They think, yeah, right, we're helping, we're doing this to see what it would be like if it happened. And that's why we're down here on the underground, that's why we're fabricating bombs, that's why we're getting walking wounded, that's what the ambulance services are being called out for. But there's a small group within that who do that which is unthinkable. They've got a different agenda. Remember, on the morning of 7/7, Bush and Blair were meeting together at Gleneagles. It was totally imperative for the whole future of the world, this is where the New World Order would see it, that their agenda, which is the war on terror, be projected, and the alternative agenda be rejected. The alternative agenda, if I may just remind you, was a story of love and peace and good vibes, of lovely music just before 7/7, and of terrific hope. Remember all that music, all the campaign, Make Poverty History, and people dancing in the square, in Trafalgar Square, on July the 6th, rejoicing that Britain had got the Olympic Games, and the Bob Geldof with his music. When had you ever seen British people as happy as that? So that agenda had to be derailed. And that hope had to be extinguished and had to be replaced by we're walking, Bush and Blair, we're walking tough against the terrorists, and we are continuing with the war on terror. That is what the military need. The huge multinationals wanted to keep their snouts in the trough of Africa, milking it for all the diamonds and gold. They didn't want this forgiveness of debt and so on. So there's a vast kind of multinational purpose of what went down on 7/7, and some people even think this